Yeah, we can always edit and take things out.
So I'll just start over here. We've got Justin Carpenter and Madhava and myself, Kyle Shiveldayoff. We've just had a 5-minute chat so far, just catching up on a few things. And we're currently talking about some aspects of, well, I guess the law of one actually, and just discussing that a little bit. Yeah. And one thing I wanted to mention to you guys there is, I don't know if you've read the handbook for the new paradigm. There's 4 books. I came across this in some research within the LL research database, and I found this reference to the handbook for the new paradigm. And a question was asked to, I believe it was Quo, around, is this of Confederation origin? And they said yes. And I went, ooh, interesting, because it's very rare that LL research references other material. So I got these books, and I've plowed through them over the past few months. And one of the key messages in there is what we were just talking about, victim consciousness. And they talk about how this victim consciousness is tricking us to believe that there's going to be a savior that comes, instead of actually looking inside for us to be our own creator and our own savior. And this victim consciousness has been kind of a spell put across humanity. And it keeps us in this lower state of consciousness where we are waiting for that savior, and we're very much disempowered.
I love that. Yeah, it's you know, we were talking earlier about the sort of difficulty in navigating what is truth, and you know, picking through the weeds and finding the gold. And I think I found a simplistic way to look at it, and kind of the view of the grand deception as we see it. But we're taught from the very beginning that everything we have to seek is always external. It's always something out there that we have to find these answers. It's always somewhere else. It's always somebody else. It's always something else that's telling us. When in reality, the real truth is finding that stillness and silence. It's going inward and truly connecting to God, the creator, you know, whatever you want to call it. And then you can use that to as a litmus test for whatever else is you're receiving from the external to verify. But until we do that, until we find that internal balance and truly have that ability to use real discernment, then everything else has the ability of being trickery and can deceive us.
Absolutely right. Spot on. And you know, and it can be easily misconstrued to be oh, if you get in touch with your inner sense or the stillness within, that it's going to lead you to the truth, the unassailable truth. And that also is kind of a distortion, because actually what it really leads you to is a place of uncertainty. And because we can't embrace the uncertainty in our opinions, we end up becoming entrenched in doctrine. And you know, when we start to say, oh well, if that leads me to the truth, then I'm going to meditate. Actually, it'll probably lead you to a place of uncertainty. But from that perspective, you now have some dynamicism to, you know, entertain all possibilities and then look
Right.
harder. And you know, this also may be exactly what astrologers are saying with this new age. You know, the Piscean age is really one of following doctrine. That's what's gotten out of us, you know, for the last 2,100 years. And I believe the Aquarian age is going to be something very different. It's something that will have to be self-reliant, which is, you know, the fundamental message of Ra and the law of one, is that, you know, we can't help you. The healers don't heal, right? They just allow you to access your own passageway to intelligent infinity. So, you know, it's very, very comprehensive, but it's also internally consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Another very important aspect to determining reality is what you're telling me internally consistent? Anyway, obviously,
Yeah.
we can talk about this
Well,
forever.
I think that ties in beautifully with what Kyle said as far as the victim consciousness, because ultimately we have to take responsibility for everything. We can't rely on anyone else, anything else, to take responsibility for everything that we see and everything that we do. And we've spent so long having that sort of mindset of, oh, I'm not going to worry about it because it's not doesn't have to do with me necessarily, and that's what's allowed all of these sort of travesties and these dark elements to take hold of everything, is our lack of responsibility and lack of willingness to even care about it.
Mm.
I find myself frequently coming back to however someone resonates with being, incarnate, only here your all of your existences, whether you consider yourself a wanderer, a star seed, an indigo child, crystal child, whatever, however you look at things. Where we are right now is here. We're here on planet Earth, which is at a third density of light in a third dimension of space-time. And if you unpack that, and if you resonate with it, especially looking at the law of one teachings, is that one of the primary points of being here is decide which path you want to go on. Do you want to go down the positive path, service to others, unity, oneness, compassion, empathy, forgiveness? Or do you want to go down the negative path where I, me, mine? I don't mind being a little better than someone else, a little hierarchy, that's okay. Instead of equality, come on, give me some of your love light and I'll give you a fraction of that back because I feel like I'm a little more important. And I think if some people could just sit back and really look at their actions and realize that, if this is the sinkhole of indifference where you don't know which way you're going, and those that positively polarize this way and those that negatively polarize this way, part of this game is we're never going to have all the answers because the veil is so thick. That's part of the plan here, is to have a really thick veil so that we can't really find the truth. We're just constantly seeking it. And when we can start to polarize and make our decisions and our actions in one of these two ways, we start to resonate and find more information. It just shows up. And if people could be more accountable for their thoughts and their actions to be in one of these two ways, I mean, I can't help those on the negative path. I can help those on the positive path. That's where I'm seeking. But I think if people could have this mindset throughout the day of the way I'm thinking towards other, the way I'm accountable of my thoughts, because thoughts become things. If I'm more accountable of my thoughts and what I'm doing and how I'm speaking and how I'm interacting, they will start to polarize one of these two ways. And life just changes. Life just opens up as you polarize, and you're able to use more of that, as you said, Madhava, that intelligent energy, because you're more open to the information and less blocked.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. Well
Yeah,
said.
the rewards are built into the work. So are the repercussions. It's all built in there. There's no external judgmental force that's gonna, decide things later on or whenever. It's built into actions and what we take in our conscious intent. And if we're not consciously intending on doing anything, then we're always susceptible to some other external force to steer us. And that's where a majority of people are, is in that sort of lukewarm state of not necessarily choosing, and therefore they're a victim to anyone who is actively choosing to sort of steer into whatever direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, well said, both of you.
Hmm.
I really want to get to this Roger Hodgkins thing here, because that was a fascinating piece of content.
Yeah, that
But
video that out yesterday.
yeah, thank you for sharing that. Well, let's just go right there right now. I mean,
Yeah.
Sure.
so what's your take on that before I weigh in myself?
Yeah, I'll give my perspective. It's, I think as all three of us would, even though we look at things similarly, I'm sure we don't align on everything, and that's good because nor should we be fully aligning on everything. But listening to him, I mean, first of all, a lot of the information, like Justin said yesterday, a lot of the information he's put forward it's not rocket science right now. This isn't brand new information. A lot of people are saying this, but it's usually the independent news or the alternative news that seems to be reporting on it. The mainstream news is completely staying away from some of it. And those coming forward to say some of these messages are just being squashed and hidden. And his voice was short and powerful. It was from what I understand, it was a committee, council meeting in Edmonton, from what I can understand. And he spoke up, and I believe there was people on that Zoom call. And he got the floor to speak. And when you look at his background, because some people really need that academic, you constantly hear this thing in the public. Why aren't people listening to the professionals out there? Why aren't people listening to the medical professionals, like our different medical authorities that are making decisions? And so the layperson relies on who's the most qualified in that field to make these decisions. And when you look at his background, the guy seems to have everything. You know, never mind being a medical doctor, he's currently working, he's the director of a clinic that actually provides, from what I understand, the PCR tests. And he spoke about that. He's got decades of experience in the field. And in 5 minutes, he threw out there was just a bomb, basically. And so I look at it as, I'm very proud of him to come forward and risk his reputation. He's going to get a lot of backlash from that from some people. He's sticking his neck out there. But I think it opens up for a lot of conversation for people to start going, okay, well, if this guy is, he first in the beginning of his 5-minute speech, I'm going to say my credentials so people don't think I'm a quack here. And then he listed those. And so if somebody wants to judge anything he's saying, they're going to have to delve into the science of what he knows and actually have those conversations with him. But I think it's a great catalyst for people to look at this and go, oof, maybe I should be looking at things a little bit different and actually doing more research. That's what I hope happens from that, is people start to go, I need to look into what he's saying because I respect who this man is.
Well, look, I agree with you, and I do hope that his statements will be a catalyst. But to be very honest, I would say that he is one of many voices that are equally qualified. And we will make a mistake here if we say, look, this is the truth. It's coming out of this guy's mouth and he's a qualified person. Because it's going to be very easy for the layperson who is buying into the mainstream narrative to say, so what? There's, way more doctors. We have the WHO and the CDC and all of these other people saying that he's wrong. So bringing people to a position to say, to change their mind it can be thwarted if we contextualize his message as being the truth, because they will look at us and say, why should I believe you? And like, the mainstream media is not telling this. Why isn't, CNBC putting him on? And so we run into a really powerful barrier in catalyzing people's need to yearn for more information, because it's very easy for them to just shove us aside and say, oh, you're another conspiracy theorist. Don't listen to him. He's crazy too. So, what I thought was interesting about his statement, and it comes back to the PCR stuff that you're talking about, Kyle, which is he missed something there. He only said it's bullshit. These tests are crazy. It's just it's a narrative that they're getting us to buy into. It's very important to first not tell people, look, this guy needs to be listened to, and ignore everybody else. He did not go into a very, very important aspect of our approach to this pandemic, which is testing. All he did was say testing is bullshit. PCR testing is bullshit. And I designed the tests, or I'm involved in how these tests are distributed. But he didn't say the most important fact, which is something that we can find commonality with the conventional narrative proponents, which is to ask them, what is the sensitivity and specificity of the PCR diagnostic test that's being used? What is it? There's no answer to that. We don't have an answer because we don't have a gold standard. This is a very important piece of information for everyone to consider, is how do you know how good the test is? And I'm saddened that he didn't bring this up, but the reality is we've never isolated CoV-SARS-2 from a tissue sample. Because we've never done that, we have no way to gauge how sensitive or specific the PCR test is. That's the first part of this. Never mind the fact that we have never been able to isolate the virus. But if you don't have the metrics of the test, you don't have a valid test to begin with. That's the first thing. The second thing is the PCR test is a series of amplification stages where you look for a target sequence of RNA, right? And we have to trust that the RNA sample that's being targeted is actually unique to the CoV-SARS-2 virus. I don't know what sequence that is, what sequence of RNA that is. I've looked into it a lot, and I don't know what it is, and I cannot tell you that it is specific to that particular strain of virus. But moreover, the more number of times, or the more you run the amplification cycle in PCR, the greater the sensitivity of finding that target sequence is. How do you know how many times to run the test? That also is not standardized. It depends on which country you're living in. So if you run the amplification sequence iteration 30 times versus 50 times, you're going to arrive at a far less number of positive results based on the number of amplification cycles. That is also not being standardized. So, these are the aspects I think that are very, very important to bring out when offering this piece of content to someone who's scratching their head about the whole thing. Ask them to go find out what the sensitivity of the PCR test is. We don't know what it is. So yet that governs how we're responding to the pandemic. That I think is a very important aspect to this whole approach.
Yeah, I'd say his perspective is just a piece of the puzzle, to have a grand look at how much has been distorted with what's coming forward, and having another person question the methodology. And yeah, probably he didn't go into enough detail about what we could do better, or what exactly about the test is bullshit, which I would love to have. I would love him to do a full-on presentation about it. But I think just having that extra word from one other person, and to me, it almost gets kind of tiring over it to even talk about it, because it's the same sort of questions I've had from the very beginning of like, why are we doing all of this? Why is no one else questioning why this is happening in this particular way? So it's another voice to add to those collective voices that are questioning it. And he happens to have some additional credentials, which, going back to our earlier conversation about taking responsibility of ourselves, I don't think we necessarily need to have people with credentials tell us what the truth is. But for a lot of people who are still stuck in that mindset, it's helpful to catalyze and draw into those questions. And then hopefully people will start to look into those sort of things that you brought forward of, why is this test bullshit? What is ineffective about it? And what do we need to do to get it to the right place? Or is it even a valid measurement? Can we even test for this thing? So I thought it was is really helpful to hear that perspective. But again, it's almost kind of to even cover it, because it's like, we knew this from the beginning. We've been saying this, and no one's listening. And I suspect that, even like you said, if it doesn't go on to MSNBC or wherever else, that there will still be a large swath of the population that will not even acknowledge it. I've made the comparison that the only people that listen to whatever is being said, it has to be blessed by the high priests of this time, which the high priests of this time are the mainstream news. And if it's not blessed by them, then to many people it is invalid. And that will always be that way. But each little additional piece of the puzzle, we gain a little bit more traction, and a few more people are questioning things. So it's a pragmatic approach, and it kind of has to be that way.
You're right. And please, whoever is listening to this, don't get me wrong. I'm not condemning him for not explaining more. After all, you're right, Kyle. And you have a good point too, Justin. He delivered a lot of truth bombs in 5 minutes, and sometimes 5 minutes is all you have to deliver a message. But the blessing of the mainstream media is what is the biggest problem here, because it still is astonishing to me how intelligent people don't acknowledge the fact. Like, what I like to ask people is, and here's my frustration, because I'm a physician, and I'm frustrated because none of my colleagues are speaking out against this. And we always should ask, what will it take for you to consider the alternative perspective? What will it take? And it's always, especially in the intelligentsia, the liberal, whatever you want to call them, the educated elite, say, well, show me a piece from the New York Times that backs you up, right? And right away, I say, you understand that the conspiracies that we're talking about here, the prime conspirator is the mainstream media. So when you're looking for proof that comes from them, you are stuck in dogma. Because what's the difference between saying the mainstream media or saying the Bible? It's pure dogmatic thinking. It's not going to come from them. It never will. So waiting for it is purely illogical. And this is where, like, I still don't understand why, like, I can understand, like, people who are prone to conspiracies or, whatever, will just dismiss that. But why are the, supposedly intellectuals not able to see that they're stuck in a dogmatic framework? They're never going to find the proof they need in the places they look.
Yeah, well, I think we touched on this initially at the beginning of the conversation before we started recording, but the whole design of this brilliant system, the people who are quote unquote more educated are just more indoctrinated. They're more prone to thinking that they know the truth because they've been taught a very selected, curated aspect of what reality is, and therefore anyone who steps outside of that is false and saying something inaccurate. And then they have the hubris to add to it with the amount of money that's been poured into it, the amount of time that's been poured into their studies, to think that surely I couldn't have spent all this time and all this effort onto something that's wrong. Surely I couldn't have, been steered this wrongly for this long. And so it creates this very strong barrier, this very strong cognitive dissonance that is very difficult to break. And that's why you see people who, you know, tend to have more education as being more susceptible to the dogma that's being put forward, which is, disheartening, but it makes sense from a grand perspective. You have to look at the whole picture to see why that is.
I think that cognitive dissonance is such a key point too, because I see that clinically with so many of my clients that are educated people. And I don't say that with any sort of hierarchy, but usually people that are educated have had to learn how to do some research, whatever field they're in, how to do literature reviews and actually look at information and determine what's reliable, and even maybe even understand some aspect of statistics to understand is this dodgy science or is this real science to some degree. It gets really difficult when you get into those nuances. But I find there is something psychologically that, and I don't even know the right terms. I mean, it's my field, and I don't sometimes even know how to look at it, because there's just some aspect of human nature that, I don't know if it's the defensive and the offended subconscious programs that we get over the years. And there's something where people have this defensive mechanism inside of them that they have invested their opinion on this one narrative and they can't let that go. And I find it amazing when I'm working clinically with someone and I hear them get dogmatic. For example, the other day, someone talked about this or that, and this person was so aggressive and rude, and it was like one of those fucking Trump supporters, and he went on around what a typical Trump supporter is, a loud mouth, this or that. And I had to look at him and say, can I challenge you on something there? And he said, okay. I said, well, I'm not, but someone could easily label me as a Trump supporter. I mean, I'm someone that I hated Trump. I remember posting something on Facebook around, he's a narcissist. Look at my peers, psychologists and psychiatrists, label him as this guy should be out of office. And then it wasn't until COVID hit that I thought, I need to see what the heck's going on. And I never used to look into politics. And then I started realizing just how much the mainstream media was spinning what he was saying. Again, not trying to say he's a this or a that. I was just seeing these inaccurate representations of the information that he was trying to disseminate in his awkward way of speaking. And so I said to this person, I think that sometimes people are just looking for the information. They're not on this left or this right or pro this or anti that. They're just seeking information. And sometimes it's really valuable to sit back and look at the information as fresh and new and not try and lump someone into categories, because this common term that is used, this divide and conquer takes place. where you divide and you have to pick a side. And that is very much being programmed into us through the mainstream narrative, is that either you're this or you're that. And then people get this, this deluge of information coming through social media and all these things that align with that narrative. And it's a subconscious programming that, yes, this is the way I think, this is the way I look at things. And then this cognitive dissonance kicks in for the other things. And someone's almost too programmed, too wired, too invested in that view. They've thought about it, because thoughts become things. And they've thought about this so much that they've actually created their world, their narrative, their view around these foundational elements that are really hard to break now.
Yeah, agreed. I don't know what to say. I mean, it's a very, very tough nut to crack. When we're your point is excellent. Their world is a very solid world, and any true inquiry into their foundational belief system is considered a threat. And when you're threatened, you're fearful, and we all know what happens to your frontal lobes when that happens. But like even the word Trump is just a charged word right away. It's extremely polarizing. And this aspect to the discussion about labels is really, really important, because I truly believe these labels are part of the cabal's methodology, as you said, of dividing and conquering. Because you say anti-vax, for example, and people think that, oh my God, you want people to die of polio. But the true, movers and shakers of the anti-vax movement are not saying throw away all vaccines. We've been trying to reformulate them for decades. So, when you use these labels, it becomes extremely polarizing. Like, anti-vax is one of 9/11 deniers, right? Like using that term denier, people say, oh, you think that 9/11 never happened? It's like, no, wait a minute. We're saying it happened. We're just saying there's a different explanation. Even the word pseudoscience, that's being thrown around to label anything that challenges the conventional scientific perspective as pseudo, even though there's extremely good evidence that is very scientific. Or what about this one? Fake news. You hear fake news and people say, oh, you believe that everything that's fake that comes out of the news? It's like, no. They say a lot of stuff that's accurate, but they don't tell you the truth on some things. So this is an aspect of the negative energy, or whatever you want to call it, that is playing out on our use of language, not just our thinking. And it takes a very alert mind to see how that's influencing the way we're thinking. And this is where it becomes so hard, because everyone is labeled already.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't even bring up a contrary position to the juggernaut of mainstream media narrative without being labeled a Trump supporter, for example. And to go into this a little further, I mean, if we really want to take a look at what's happening here, I actually don't believe that Trump and Biden are opponents. I think they're both puppets of a much greater force. And Trump has been anointed, if you will, or chosen for a very specific reason, because he is a deeply flawed individual. We all can see that. But he's giving voice to some important truths that need to be squelched. And one of those truths, as espoused by the Q movement, is that you shouldn't trust the mainstream media, which is a massive truth bomb. They're right. But they believe Trump is the savior. There is where the distortion happens. Like, far be it from me to know exactly what's going on, but in my paradigm, I see Trump being a voice of something that's real, but because he's so flawed and he makes other mistakes, he is now considered a threat that can be dealt with more censorship, more authoritarian control. And that's what I believe is happening. I think whether they're, willing participants or not, I believe that both of these candidates, at least in the American election, are playing their roles perfectly.
Yeah, it certainly could be another Hegelian dialectic of introducing a problem, designing the solution, and steering us into that direction. Certainly, and it's one that we have to always be wary of. Have to always be prepared for the inevitability that this is just a ruse to steer us into that darkness. But the way that I see it as a lot sort of bigger perspective on this is a spiritual war on a much higher perspective. It has nothing to do with Trump or Q or any of that. And it's really God versus Satan, or however you want to classify it. The forces of light versus the forces of evil, and the forces of light are using different aspects of our physical reality to play out their agenda, just as the forces of darkness have used and are still using their forces to play out their agenda. And so we're seeing that culmination happen here on the physical plane, and I'm sure it's also happening on the spiritual plane as well, but we only have eyes to see on this one. So my thing is, again, going back to that sort of internal discernment, there's no way that I can be deceived as long with my higher power, as long as I check with my connection to the beyond, because that's the way to truly determine, is this happening for the right reasons, is this happening for the goodness and the godliness, or is this happening as another deluge, as another subterfuge to steer us into this darkness. And at that point, if I am being deceived at that scale, then truly I don't think there's really much hope for any of us. I think at that point, if what's going on with Trump and the aspect of trying to free humanity, because I tend to ascribe more to that. I think that he is working for the benevolence. I think he is an imperfect being, just as we all are, but I think he's got the hand of God on him. I think he has the forces of light that are working through him and through the people that he is surrounded by, and it's a difficult battle. And if that is a deception, then we need to be taking some pretty drastic measures otherwise. And that's where I get caught up. I get kind of stuck in that perspective at times, because if that is the reality, I don't ever hear a lot of solutions being put forward on what to do otherwise. Because at that point, like, we really need to be a lot more forceful with what we do. Because if that's the reality, then we're quickly descending into
Yes.
full enclosure very, very, very quickly. And so we need to be we need to be figuring out what to do otherwise. I personally don't see us heading that way that fast. I think it's a counterbalance, and we're right in the middle of it right now.
Mm.
But I'm certainly open to that perspective.
Well, forgive me, Kyle, if I just want to respond to that, because that's a really important point here. Because if you're right, Justin, then putting your weight behind the Trump movement, or whatever you want to call it, the right thing to do. However, if you're wrong, supporting him is going to bring on the fury. That's the way I see it. And this is why this conversation is very, very important, because I see, we know how the mainstream media, who is always in ascendance, is portraying him, as a crazed authoritarian figure that is clearly, has so many different ethical and moral flaws. I mean, the guy was basically raised in with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he's friends with all of the people that you would consider to be part of a cabal. He's in a billionaires club. He's hung out with Jeffrey Epstein. He's done horrible things in his career that were easily considered misogynistic or racist. And he loves to have power, and he loves to have control. This is not the sign of a light being. And that's how he's being portrayed. Now you get behind him and you start saying things like, listen to the guy from Canada, who is throwing down truth bombs about the virus. And now you're going to be the subject of ad hominem attacks. Um, you believe in Trump, therefore this guy, Roger Hodgkins, must be out of his mind. That's how it's getting played. So this is a very, very important aspect to how to assess the situation. And the more I look at history, the more I see that the cabal always has the upper hand. Like I see that they've seen this stuff coming.
Mhm.
And this is why it's very difficult at this point right now, because if you're right, yeah, we should all wear our MAGA hats and talk about how good he is. But I actually think, and I've said, I'm not going to go into this any further, but I think he's actually playing the cabal game. And one of my arguments would be the Q phenomenon, right? Because you could consider this to be I don't know how you guys feel about this, whether you think it's a truth movement or a light movement or not. But, the very aspect of it, which is to say there is a deep state, there is a dark force behind our policymaking and governmental actions, is true. But I forgot where I was going with this. If that is true, which I believe it is true, and then they associate Trump as being the savior, that that's where it gets scary for me. And this is where people will be like, oh my gosh, how can you believe in that? We need to control the voices of opposition. Let's increase censorship. And we see that happening. So I really believe that the truth is not on either camp, it's in between. And the in between message is never heard anywhere. That's what scares me. There's very few people. There's so many intellectuals out there that say that if you believe that 9/11 was a false flag, then you must believe that the earth is flat. And they don't even believe that there are people out there that exist that think that there's 9/11 was a controlled demolition and the earth is round. See, this is where it's very, very confusing.
Yeah, what I think to draw on past point of putting people in boxes and always having the either or, black and white, and there's no median, there's no central, there's no balance, which I think is really important. And I think people who do put their faith in a savior like Trump or whomever within that whole world, I think you're missing the point as well. I think that's another spiritual trap. That's another false light worship. But my thing is I'm aligned with the truth, no matter speaking it, no matter who is saying it, and I understand what, based on the truth, based on how this world actually is set up, based on how every aspect of our lives have been curated and manicured to be steered, all portions of our institutions have been orchestrated for the very specific purpose of enslaving us. And that's only been building and building and building and building. So knowing that as truth, and no one else needs to tell me that to know that, knowing that as the truth, I can understand how this could play out in a way to where Trump he couldn't come out there and just say, hey, this is the state of the world. You guys were being enslaved for this amount of time, and lay it all out there to the public, because he would be destroyed. He would be absolutely burned at the stake. There would be no way. He probably wouldn't even last in office if he started telling things like that, because the way that people's minds are so warped by what the truth is and by what reality is, based on these arbiters of truth, allegedly, who put it out there, they would destroy him. So it has to be done in a sort of drip fashion, where it has to come out slowly, and it has to come out in a way to where people are going to acknowledge and see it. And that's what we're seeing play out right now. It can't happen all of a sudden. Trump couldn't come out and say vaccines are horrible, even though in his history he has condemned them. He has said that there are issues within how our autism rates have been rising due to vaccines and things like that. He has openly said that. But now he has to play this game, knowing full well that people are so tied to that system, their minds are so controlled to that. He has to find ways to navigate that in a sort of optics sort of standpoint. And that's what I think we're still playing out now. with only the continuing trajectory of full transparency and full truth eventually at the very end. And if it doesn't get to that point, I will be the absolute first to acknowledge it, because my allegiance and my is not to Trump, it's not to any of those, it's to the truth. And if I find out that these characters are playing us, if they're aligned with that darkness that is putting more subterfuge out there, I'll be the first to admit it and be the loudest voice to tell people otherwise. But until that point, until I see tangible evidence that they're not working on this sort of 5D chessboard to get the truth to the public in a way where they can actually dissect and disseminate it, then I'll be aligned with that. Because if it came out all of a sudden, the chaos that would ensue would be astronomical. You know, if it happened, if we rip the Band-Aid off now, violence would happen inevitably. If we don't prove to the people how deep this goes, how entrenched we were, how ensnared we were, if we don't show them, and that's what's happening with this whole virus talk as well, is these plans that were absolutely 100% the plans of the cabal to release this virus, steer as much fear, steer us into this direction. That was 100% their plan. That's being allowed to play out. That's being allowed to be shown. And many examples are playing out too, you know, with the whole what was happening in Canada, where the plans were released on the internment camps that they were going to set up to bring people in who refused the vaccine or refused the tests. Those are real. Those are real plans, real documents that were being formulated. They were going to be released. But now we have, from my perspective, we have people working benevolently behind the scenes to ensure that that information not only gets out, but it doesn't actually happen. It only is exposed, but we don't actually see the tangible repercussions of allowing that to play out. Which kind of fits in from a spiritual perspective as well, because this whole period is about spiritually growing, and we have to kind of receive some of the effects of our karma that's been building up from our ignorance, from our lack of responsibility over this whole time period. We've allowed these people to have taken hold of this to this degree. So we have to experience a little bit of suffering to understand what we actually were playing a part in. I don't know. That's my take.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
So I have a lot to say here, Kyle, but I don't want to cut you out of the conversation. Please
Well,
jump in if you want.
yeah, I'd love to jump in. Right when you opened up the spiritual door, Justin, I was just about to go there too. So,
Great.
For me, and we're all going to look at this a little different and similar in some ways too. I really try and step back and look at this spiritually. Like I think in our own way, we'd all agree that we believe we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And I think the majority of the population looks at it that way, whether they're looking at it through a religious angle, through a spiritual angle. We're some sort of consciousness operating a body for a lifetime and having an experience, which we learned spiritual lessons to learn and grow from. And I'm looking at this right now as this is one of the great catalysts. It's the same catalyst as going across the world for anyone that's able to look at news and be on social media. And Trump, like him or not, I mean, I don't have really any opinion on that. To me, he's just a man in a role. He's an actor on a stage, as the Law of One would talk about. We're all actors on a stage. And he is, in some ways, the collective consciousness of the United States standing on his stage. There is so much anger. He represents that sometimes. There's ignorance. He represents that. There's intelligence. He represents some of that. Like, he is almost every persona mixed together in some ways, standing, representing the United States. And for some people, that's too much to look at. They'll look at some side of them and say, I don't agree with that, or I don't like that mirror being shined on me. I'm not that. But at the end of the day, we're all guides to each other. We are physically incarnated guides to each other. However we look at each other, we're learning from each other all the time. We're mirrors to each other. We live in a house of mirrors. And so right now we're going through a time of great catalyst where we can all look at some of the same mirrors and see different reflections for what we need to see. And it's a time for people to go, how are we going to grow from this? Do we get caught up in the illusion and point fingers and call names? And do we pick sides and divide and conquer and let those throwing this information at us be the ones that decide how we organize from this chaos? Or do we stand up into our own right and say, I can talk about this. I can look at both sides. I can have intelligent conversation, open my heart, and I can look at this through a lens of trying to be less distorted how I'm looking at this and hearing these conversations than being activated by our defensive and offended programs that make us pick a side. So I think a key thing for people right now is to try and look at this a bit more spiritually. And for anyone that doesn't resonate with that, one of my favorite things to say to people when I'm working with them, if they don't look at things spiritually, is everything is about energy. Everything is about the spiritual journey. A prime example is not every human being seeking love? Is not every human being seeking love between each other and love for ourselves? What is love? Show me where love is. Manifest love. Make a scientific experiment and a methodology to show me that love even exists. We damn well know it exists. It's the primal force of the universe, love and light. So if that is the root energy behind all of this, and we can't even figure out what the heck love is, but we know we're seeking that, we need to open up to be able to have these conversations and just try and get truth. And I feel like whether you're Trump or Biden or whatever else, you're left or right, you're pro or anti, that doesn't mean anything when you're taking one side. You're not seeking the truth. We need to be able to be accountable, step in our own sovereignty, say, I'm a human being that deserves to look at all the information and be able to make a well-informed decision, not have parts of my blockages, have parts of my unbalanced personality get in the way of looking at this important information, because then we fall into the divide and conquer. And this is a key strategy of the cabal that's been around for eons. And what is the opposite of love? Fear. So anyone that is focused on fear is playing in those energies. If we're walking around and our thoughts are focused on fear and we're entertaining fear and we're talking through fear, we are feeding that spiritual component that we're seeing manifested in the situation we're in right now. So to me, this is the greatest catalyst of all time for us to help us get through this shift in consciousness that we see taking place. I think everyone on the globe right now that is talking about any of these topics would have to say, we're going through a shift in consciousness, however you want to look at that. And unless we're able to open up and explore these different levels of consciousness, we're not going to be able to shift accordingly. We're going to be locked in levels of consciousness. So be it. It's everyone's journey. I have no judgment around that. But I think the more open we are, the greater potential we have for opening up to the information and finding the truth together, because this is all about unity and oneness at the end of the day.
Yeah, right on, brother. So let me see here. That was a lot of stuff.
There's just so much stuff. Yeah.
It's a lot of stuff. So let's just take a step back. This is a really important conversation for so many different reasons. And I'm honored to be here with both of you.
Thanks. We all, the same way.
Oh, good. Let's begin with the axiom that there's a cabal. I assume that we all agree that there is one, right?
Yes.
Okay. What is their purpose? I would imagine it's control.
Mm-hmm.
Do we all agree on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Taking control of our energy, of our thought energy, of our consciousness. Yeah.
Yes. Keeping us in a fearful state,
mm-hmm.
which provides energy for a negative path, if you will, for them. And also, in order to keep us in a fearful state, they must have a tremendous amount of control over our thoughts, behaviors, and actions. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay. So here's what I'm proposing, right? In order to get to that state of more control, you have to create fear and then create control. The both of those things go together. And as an example, one way of controlling the narrative, for example, like say you have, like, I assume we all understand what happened on 9/11, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know all the details, but I know it wasn't the official story.
Yeah, this is, I mean, this to me is the catalyst. This is the glitch in the matrix, and I've spoken about this publicly, for a while, and written about this. This is my, this is my soapbox, because this is the thing that is incontrovertibly not what we're being told. It's so obvious, and I don't like to use the word obvious because people, will say, you're telling me
Madhava,
I
just to
can't.
give a little context to this, Jason, I don't know
Mhm.
your background with this. Madhava, you are or were a professional engineer, a PN, right? And I
Mhm.
spent 10 years as a frontline firefighter. So I watched every documentary I could talking with guys about this. So I feel we all have our own connection to 9/11. That is
Mhm.
We
powerful.
all do, yes, one way or the other. And like, credentials or not, the point is it's worthy of investigation, because this is the one element that is incontrovertibly wrong, as demonstrated by the mainstream media. So it is hard. It would be hard for the cabal to suppress inquiry into 9/11, because it's so clearly not what they're telling us it is. But one way they can do that is to create a flat earther movement. You see what I'm saying? You create a movement where there's a bunch of people that insist that we still live on a saucer-shaped planet, right? Clearly wrong. And then you associate the two movements and you group them together into the conspiracy theorist bubble, allowing a great majority of people to dismiss the truth behind a challenge to the mainstream media. This is a very, very potent way of squelching truth and promoting fear. And so this is kind of what my argument is. And it's great that we don't completely see everything the same way, because that's what I believe Q is. I believe Q has been created by the same people who are part of the cabal. And my argument here is that Q basically, through their drops, they're saying, look, the light beings are, in function. Trump is our savior. There's going to be a reckoning. There's going to be, people who have been doing these horrible things are finally going to be given indictments. Stay tuned. And we're, part of this allegiance or alliance that is trying to take down the deep state. And here's where my argument here is, if that were the case, why tell us about it? This is something that should be done behind closed doors, not with drops on 4chan or 8chan or whatever. Just do it already. And I understand it takes time, but when you tell the public that's what's going to happen, that for me right away takes away some credibility of what this is about. Because far be it from me to know exactly what's going on. I don't claim to know, but a cabal is something very, very powerful. We all know that, and we all know that they've been in ascendancy for centuries. And depending on what source you are willing to listen to, they have a pretty good idea of where things are going. And so I would suggest that you wouldn't, if you were actually attacking these kind of people in a way that would hurt them, you wouldn't go public with it. It would be something that you'd have to keep very, very quiet, and then boom, let it all go with something, but don't tell anybody about it. Like, this is my argument about why I'm scratching my head about Q, and this is why I'm sort of portraying the Q movement as kind of the flat earther movement, which is you present a you know a narrative that can be easily attacked by the mainstream, which is controlled by the cabal, and get people to attack it. And therefore, you do something very, very interesting energetically and spiritually, because we know from the law of one that in order to really affect change, you have to get the oppressed to accept the oppression. We know that. And it's not just from the law of one, because if they put us all in a cage, we would completely, we would break down the wires. We would take it all down. We'd say, you can't put us in a cage, but you make us enter the cage because you think, we think it's safer to go in the
Yeah.
cage.
Free choice, free will
Free
is
choice.
given. Yeah.
Yes. So without imposing upon our free will, they get us to succumb to their idea of safety, which means authoritarian rule. So this is how I'm looking at it energetically. They have to get our consent for these things. And the best way to get our consent is to show us what would happen if we decided to protest their narrative. You get a bunch of, and I'm not saying that everybody who supports Trump is completely unhinged and off their rocker. I'm saying that that's how they're being portrayed by the people who now are in ascendancy, which is, the Bidens, the mainstream media, all of this. So this is the way they get us to actually, dismantle a really, really important message that Trump supporters are putting out, which is to not trust everything you're being told. And so by offering it that way, we accede to their ruse. And this is where, I believe we're in quicksand right now. And by struggling, I'm saying, taking off your mask and saying we shouldn't be wearing masks, or promoting Trump with these rallies, is actually making us wriggle around so we sink deeper. We have to be very careful about how we approach this. That's my concern.
Kind of picking our battle.
Picking your battle, and also not inciting the beast. We have to think very closely about how to approach this. It's more complicated than we realize. And this is an element that's almost never spoken about. It's either this or that. You're one side or the other, like we were saying. And this is why the trap is so elegantly created, because the more we struggle against it, the more we bring on the locks and the cages. And I don't have an answer to this from my perspective. I mean, if I'm wrong, that's great. Let's do the right thing. But I'm afraid that we're going to do the wrong thing by getting behind one of these signs. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Justin, before you talk though, if I can go first, because I know you know more about Q than I do, right?
Go for it.
So I'll just throw my little bit out there and then you can elaborate. I honestly don't know a heck of a lot about Q. I haven't spent much time on that research. I'm very familiar with what it represents. My opinion on it, I honestly, I don't have an opinion on Q. I've seen some of the drops. I've seen a lot of people talk about it. I don't study the drops myself. I just hear different independent media talk about it. My take on that is, I think you hit a big point there, Madhava, and that, and Justin, you talked about this a bit earlier. I don't know if it was before we recorded, is that free choice and free will is critical. We are having this apparent individual experience on planet Earth to decide, do we want to go down the positive path or the negative path? That's the key thing. Do we want to spend, 4D above, until obviously 60, the way we would look at law of one? Do you want to play on the negative side, or do you want to play on the positive side? And there's no really good or bad about that. You need polarity. Batteries need charge. And so we need this polarity to have that charge in the system to be able to have that experience. But right now, in this physical illusion, if you will, it's meant to be this way. It's meant to be chaotic. It's especially during this time of ascension, harvest, illumination, whatever you want to call it, shift in consciousness. You resonate with some of the past philosophies. This is that time. This is that time where we need to, as my dad would say, shit or get off the pot. Like, which way do you want to go? Are you ready? And if you're not ready, hey, that's okay too. Stay in the quicksand and you'll have more experiences and future incarnations in that. But with the Q part of it, to me, I look at it as, if there's truth within that, and there must be some level of truth, who knows to what level, it's an opportunity for dissemination of information. If you look at channel material, which to some people seems weird, to all of us, not strange. To the work I do in consciousness, it seems to make complete sense, actually. Anyone that believes in the Bible or any of those ancient texts would have to believe that it's channeled to some degree. There's a medium in between that information. Q could be an opportunity to allow some information to be disseminated to those that are giving their free will. They are ready to be an instrument, a receiver of that information by seeking in that direction to get that information. So it could be just one of these ways to disseminate information, just like Trump is doing it his way, Biden's doing it his way, mainstream media that way, independent media that way, depends where you're seeking and how you're seeking, you'll find those answers. So Q might just be part of this whole matrix that we are co-creating, and that needed to be a platform to be able to disseminate some information, whatever. I mean, how much truth is there in any of this right now? To me, this is all an illusion anyways. And so this is just a game that we're in to try and, you know, figure things out and see which way we're pulled, positive, negative, positive, negative. And so with the Q thing, I don't have a strong opinion. But at the same time, I look at it as information and research that people can consider. But Justin, I think you probably have an opinion.
Yeah, well, I've got some thoughts for sure. So I would say if we take a step back and go back to our general understanding that there is a cabal and what their intentions were, it was to seek and control the entire everything and everyone as tightly and as limitedly as possible. So we have that understanding. My thoughts are from just a strategic standpoint. If I take on that perspective of I'm in the cabal, I'm aimed at enslaving humanity, I want to do that. My thing is, why would I share any of this at all? Why would I release this kind of information that Epstein and Maxwell had this island where they were trafficking children and doing all sorts of horrible things? Why would I let the information get out about the Nexium sex cult? Why would I let the information get out about Hunter Biden's laptop and what he's involved with? Why would I have, I mean, literally record amounts of arrests of people who are involved with human trafficking? Why would I have Trump sign an executive order that specifically targets anyone involved with human trafficking to have all their assets seized and move in that direction? Why would I allow any of that information? Because I had it very perfectly wound up. Anytime any of that information started to come out, it was always ridiculed, pushed down, batted away, and it was very effective. People didn't know this kind of world existed. They had no idea that the darkness that it sits right behind the scenes at all times. And so just from a strategic standpoint, if I really wanted to enslave humanity, I wouldn't put any of this information out, and I would just go straight to the 5G towers and implement all sorts of frequencies that would make people sick. They had all the, like, we can find all of these plans of what they intended to do. And if we had moved in that direction, we see how people reacted to just the simple mask mandates. You know, we're so quick to just gobble up whatever came out of the authoritarian mouth. And this is even after a lot of this information had started to come out. So we've had this huge amount of shift, you know, millions of people who do follow what Q is putting out there, millions of people who do align with what Trump is saying, who are starting to become more aware of the sort of darkness that was behind this world. Why would I get to that point to get all of these people up to speed on the fact that when my end game was just to subvert and control? It seems kind of counterintuitive to even implement that. Now it could be a grand deception where they want to sort of wave the light in front of us in order to snatch it away at the very end, and that's always possible. And you know, I always tell people I'm always prepared for the worst, and I think that's a part of um, a spiritual practice in general, is just finding that contentment regardless of what happens in my external world. So no matter, even if even if we are subject to the most vile torture and the most awful things imaginable, I'm still going to find my peace, my stillness and silence. My internal sanctuary is here, and as long as I find that, no matter what my external influences are, then I cannot be moved. And
Like Viktor
there's,
Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
yeah,
There's a
exactly,
prime
yeah, that's a
example.
Yeah.
beautiful example of that. And so no matter what, I can't be moved. So that, all that to say, I'm prepared for that worst case outcome, but just the way that I'm analytically seeing, and if I'm imagining if I were a member of this cabal trying to subvert and control everyone, there's no way that I would let this information get out. There's no, because it only makes it more difficult. It only makes it more difficult for that end game.
Well,
Go
to
ahead.
respond to that, which is an excellent point, right? And a couple of things you said were really, really good. The first is the fact that you realize that you're willing to change position. You know, just the idea of uncertainty in your perception puts you light years ahead of most people. And the reason to counter what you're saying is that the reason why you put it out there, number one, is to get our the collective to understand that that could exist, right? Because if you were trying to keep it hidden, there shouldn't be a Q leak. But I understand where you're coming from, is that because there's a Q leak, you're now saying that, oh, they're trying to let us know that that's what's afoot. But from a pragmatic perspective, there's no reason to tell anybody anything. You just take down the sex traffickers, and you take down the, the Maxwells and all of that stuff, and just let it happen. There's no reason to let us know. That was my old argument.
Well,
But imagine if the person who was if the person who was talking about these things was not someone like Trump, but someone like Obama, okay, who is well liked by the intelligentsia of this world, then it takes on a much greater level of authenticity. But because it's being espoused by Trump, and these are truths, what you're saying is absolutely true. I totally understand that there's this huge sex trafficking thing going on right now, beyond other things. But because Trump is the one that's saying it, it allows them to then attack the people who support Trump, so that that message will forever be considered a fringe idea. You see,
well,
that's. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not saying that that's the way it is. I'm saying that this is why they would let us know and make the prophet be someone like Trump, as opposed. They could
well,
have picked up anyone. They could have picked anyone out there that would be more believable.
I don't really think they had many options, to be honest. I think that the amount that this filth kind of permeates in those levels of people, I mean, they didn't have enough money to fund the campaign. They needed to have someone who had a lot of money, and they needed to have somebody who didn't have dark ties to this world.
All
And
fair
I think
points.
if
I agree.
I think if Trump had dark ties to this world, we would have seen them exposed far and wide, because he clearly has. And whether that's I just don't see that being a ruse. That the amount of vitriol and attacks he gets on a regular basis from these organizations, it's clearly malintent. It's clearly they're trying to do something, stir something up. So if there were some dark history, if he had some major skeletons in this closet, we would have seen that. And I've looked. I've really done a lot of digging to try and find some clear evidence of skeletons and clear evidence of nasty stuff that a lot of these people are tied to. And yeah, there have been some comments and things that he said that I don't agree with. I mean, we're all human, but I would say that the comparison to why couldn't it be somebody like Obama, I think from a spiritual perspective, it's getting us to question our innate judgment of character just by outward appearance. And so that from a larger spiritual perspective is another very tangible lesson that we can all learn, to say, here's someone who I don't necessarily agree with how he operates and how he comes across and how he personifies, but I can still accept that he's aligned with truth. He's aligned with helping out and assisting in that sort of way. And so I can set aside these initial judgments of it doesn't look exactly the way that I want it to look, but that's not how reality works. That's not how that's only the reality that we've been spoon-fed from birth, is it has to be in this particular way, and it has to be very curated. Everyone has to speak very eloquently and do things the right way. But that's not the reality. That's not how we were designed to be. We were designed to be sort of flawed in our own perspective, and have that sort of way, and then come at it from a non-judgmental perspective of where do you align and what are you trying to do, not do I like how you speak or how you carry yourself, kind of thing.
Justin, if I can add something in there, if we step back again, and I'm frequently in my life, in my work, and how I look at things, frequently, as much as I can, trying to step back and look at this as a spiritual being having a physical experience, trying to look at this from, if I could look at this from my higher self perspective. It's really difficult to do, but try and look at it through a lens of how I understand some of the rules of this incarnation to work. And I do, generally speaking, the source I go to that I find is the most reliable and internally and externally consistent in a lot of ways is the law of. When I look at that, there are these fundamental aspects of consent. There are these fundamental aspects of even the dark forces. So the dark forces have to be somewhat transparent in what they're doing to get permission, to get consent. They can't be so manipulative where someone just would never have known they gave consent to that, but they can twist it, they can manipulate it and get consent from people. And a prime example is the masks right now and some of these other areas. You know, people so focused on certain things. I wonder if there's something in there. I don't even know how to articulate this, but I wonder if there's something in there with the Q movement or some of these drops where there is, whether you believe it to be, you know, the benevolent side or the malevolent side, accurate information or twisted information. I wonder if there's just, we're going through such a shift right now, and there is so much catalyst taking place and so many directions that the deep state could go, and you know, the alliance, if you will, the other direction, that they have to disclose some of this to see where the population gives their consent towards. And so it's like, here's information, and then the populace can make their free choice, give their consent, the direction of where that information will lead them towards. And with there being everything's so polarized right now, that there's such potential energy out there for so many directions to go, that it seems to be, you know, I think many people talk about that. It seems like the deep state is kind of at the end of their game. They're getting so desperate that they're trying everything right now, trying to cause as much chaos, as much disharmony. I mean, look at the mainstream media. It's pretty easy nowadays for someone to just look at the mainstream media, go to, say, I don't know, Del Bigtree, Ben Swan, Epoch Times, and a few others, see contrasting points. And you'd have to go, well, it's somewhere in the middle, even if it leans one of two ways. But unless someone gets the catalyst to look in these areas and start seeking and give permission and consent for some of these to manifest further from those that are you know, the puppet controllers, I wonder if some of these drops in that information is just allowing these different avenues of possibility to be seeds that are planted for germination.
Definitely.
Does
Yeah,
that
I
make
mean,
sense?
definitely, absolutely does. And I think too, because there was one point, Madhava, you said earlier about, well, if these are benevolent forces, why wouldn't they just do it? Why do they have to tell us? Like, why wouldn't they just arrest all of these people, all these criminals, and show us? And my thing is, because it's not about the short-term fix. It's not about just arresting the people who are in power, because it's a whole mindset that has permeated, and we are so conditioned into thinking, into being so easily manipulated by people with that mindset, that if there was a short-term fix, say if Trump is working benevolently and all these people are arrested, he serves another 4 years, and then next 4 years down the road, we're still going to be as susceptible to that same sort of usurpation, where someone could easily come along and just snatch the entire consciousness again and steer us right back into that trajectory of world enslavement. So this whole process, it's not about just the physical battle of exposing criminals. It's about our consciousness becoming ready to handle and accept that as the reality, because we know that is the truth. But that's a very small mindset. The three of us here are very limited as far as finding other people who truly grasp the gravity and the depth of how deep this control scheme has been, and how deeply it has permeated. And the fact that that is so difficult for many to grasp means that we have a lot of work to do. And that's what I believe is happening, and why it's being disseminated to the public in this sort of way, because it's not about just the like I said, the short-term battles. It's about the long-term, preparing humanity to fully take responsibility of every aspect and demand transparency at every level all the time, never ever allowing these people to ever have this chance. Because even after this transition, even because I do believe we are astrologically, we're shifting into the Aquarian age, and that age is going to be the golden era if we do so rightly. And that these forces that are still working for control and still working aligned in that left brain ideology of control, they are always going to be there. There's no getting rid of that. That duality is going to exist. So if we are susceptible to their sort of mind control techniques, then we'll just slip back into that paradigm very quickly. And if not, then we can take responsibility and say, I'm going to acknowledge that shadow self. I'm going to acknowledge that that side of my consciousness exists. But by acknowledging it, it never can take hold. It never can control. So I just wanted to say that.
I hear what you're saying. Absolutely. If I a little puppy here. Right. Sorry.
It's okay.
We've
No,
all got dogs here, so we get it.
we just so this is our little puppy, whom we've named Satya, which means
nice.
Truth in Sanskrit.
Nice.
Love it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This whole words are so powerful, right?
So
We just
powerful.
we wanted to yell truth every time we wanted to call the dog, right?
Oh yeah, love that.
Yeah, this is the reason why, Hindus name their children after gods, every single one, because, to remind us that this is actually unity and it's divine consciousness that has appeared as a family member.
That's why we named our daughter Hope, because I wanted to say hope more. I wanted to be able to share that with people.
Absolutely. Hold on, let me let this puppy out. So Justin, I hear what you're saying. If I were to paraphrase and tell me if this is accurate or not, you're basically saying that, we have to accept that as what is actually afoot.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
As opposed to consider that yet another ploy. Once we can do that collectively, then we can have a true transformation. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And just for anyone who happens to be listening to this, I think it's really important to remember that, we may not all agree. And I'm afraid that, anyone who, sides with Justin, says, oh my gosh, he's a Trump supporter, screw him, or that guy with the screwy hair, with the light in his face is not a Trump supporter, so, screw him. It doesn't really matter because,
and Kyle's got to make up his mind.
Yes, Kyle, because Kyle is actually sitting there, at least on my screen, in between us, saying, "Look, it could be both or neither. Who knows?" And you keep bringing up this about, this is a 3D experience. What is it all for? We, ultimately we realize that it doesn't really matter. It's about how much you want to yearn for the light, with how assiduously you want to live your life pursuing that. That is really the real test, as for a harvest, if you will. And that's, I think, the most important thing to keep in mind, is to keep looking harder. But on a more, on a less philosophical level, I do believe that we're at a crossroads right now, because if I jumped onto your bandwagon, Justin, and said, let's just go with the fact that Trump is a light worker and just get behind him 100%. And if he is actually what you say, then that would be the right thing to do, right? In that context of right and wrong. But on the other hand, if I'm right, we might be playing into a trap. So we're actually, at a very, very, it's impossible to know what to do. So we go back to Kyle's perspective, which is, let's just love everybody. That's really the only way out. And it's the only sensible way out, because there's no way to know what's actually happening here. And which is why, the law of one is so unbelievably insightful, because Ra was asked, so how do we bring this, what about to the starving masses? Like, how do we get this message of unity to those who are hungry? And Ra says, screw the message, just give them food, for God's sake. You know what I'm saying? That's what you should be doing. Like, forget about all of this. You give people what they need out of love, whether or not it is a higher level of wisdom. You give them what they need. And in that action comes the liberation. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
And to add one thing there, Madhava, I think a key thing to take from that as well is that, and this gets a little more philosophical, but
Jesus, I didn't know we could get more philosophical.
Well, you said it. You prefaced that with, this isn't going to be as philosophical,
yeah.
But it was. But I think one thing to really take home from that is that this is the density of choice. This is about making the choice, okay, and serving the light or serving the dark, and serving can be as simple as serving your thoughts, and where your thoughts are. Thoughts manifest things. Nothing human made would have been made if it wasn't thought first, and then the more thoughts sharing that thought manifested it. We're seeing that in the election right now. They're being manifested from thought. And I think, a key point there is for people to rest in, because we can get so caught up in what do I do? How do I do? What do I read? Where do I go? How do I think? All these different things. And when I say it's about love and light, it really is, because I believe, and this comes a lot from the Law of One literature, is that this is not, like, we're in a school, we're in a spiritual school. It's a physical school, but it's all about spiritual principles. And this school is not trying to teach us wisdom. We have such a thick veil to our ability to be mini creators and co-creators, and how to play with that. And this we haven't been privy to this for most of our lives. Most people, none of it. And if we can step back and go, what's the fundamental aspect of some fundamental aspects of why I'm here? One of them could be that play with the energies that can manifest change for you. And that is love and light. And if we focus our energies on trying to just work within that paradigm, you could say, it's not wisdom. We're not trying to teach each other. This is not the school of teaching. We have such a thick veil to really know what's going on. We don't even know how the gravity works. We look out in space and we know there's so much going on out there, but we don't have a clue what's going on out there. This is not a school of truth. This is not a school of understanding. This is not a school of wisdom. This is a school of love. And what we're trying to do is let each other feel how we can give unconditional love, how we can step out of the illusion that pulls us all the time to divide and conquer us, and step into our own sovereign light being, because we all are, and actually shine that light so someone else can see it. And they can see that I see you. It's like Avatar, when they go, I see you. I love that part of the movie. I see you. They see each other. They see their soul. They don't see, oh, you're a Trump this, or you're a Biden that, or you're a left, or you're a right, or you're a pro, or you're anti. No, that's the illusion. And we can step back from the illusion and try and just vibrationally let those around us know that we love them and we see them. The rest will take care of itself. We will calibrate to that. We will start to see that. We will start to feel that. We will start to seek that. And I think that's a primary thing, that if people want to step away from this gong show of a illusion that we're finding ourselves in right now, and just to take more accountability around our thoughts, our behaviors, our actions, and try and be more in the light. And if you don't see the light, be the light. Ra talks about that. And so I think there's some simple things that people can take as practical tools and start to implement those, and you will see changes in your life. If you start to play with the light, you will see changes. If you start to play with the dark, you will see changes. What are you playing with? Or are you in this sinkhole of indifference and you're light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, and you're not seeing any change in your life? I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, no, I think it's beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's so important and to remember that no matter what, it's fun to hypothesize and theorize what is going to happen, or what things are happening out there. But the whole point of this experience is for that spiritual growth. And so if we can remember that each moment, each thing that's being presented to me is another challenge, is another spiritual lesson of how do I take that in and transmute it and continue outpouring that love and light. And that in that way, no matter what happens, no matter what the truth is, no matter what actually does happen, I will always be that beacon of light for anyone who is seeking it. I will always be that representation of something where we're striving to be, and a reminder of like why we're here, and which I think is so vitally important for us all to remember, because this is all for our benefit. This is all to act as a catalyst for each of us in our each individual way to remember that, and to choose.
And then to say sorry and forgiveness.
Right.
I fuck up all the time. I'll be the first to say that. I know a lot more than I put into practice. I screw up all the time. I don't know how many times I have to apologize, because I try and step into wisdom, and I try and give too much wisdom sometimes from my perspective of wisdom. And that is not what many people are seeking right now. They're seeking love, they're seeking light, and they're seeking that vibration. The wisdom I think I'm sharing is within the illusion, the matrix that we're caught up in. And we don't even know, we don't even know what the truth is. We're seeking the truth.
Yes, well said. I would say the wisdom that can be offered in this plane is to bring not people to a truth, but to bring them to uncertainty.
Hmm.
I believe that gives them the flexibility to yearn deeply. When you start saying that it's got to be like this or like that, then you've lost them and you've not actually conveyed anything wise.
I wonder if we should
Yeah,
wrap up there soon. This
Yeah,
is
let's
probably an
wrap
hour
up.
and a half already.
yeah, it's a good note to
I
end
love
on.
it, but I want to make it digestible for people.
Sure.
Yeah. Well,
I could
thank you.
plant a couple seeds.
What's that?
I can plant a couple seeds just in case,
Yeah.
if we have some people watch this and go, hey, interesting, but something we were going to do is throw out a few questions, and maybe that's something we can do in a later discussion if people are interested. And so some of the questions that I just loosely brought forward would be, you know, we already did some of this, giving our kind of perspective on some things. If people are interested in hearing more about certain perspectives, we'd happily go into some areas. If people want some tips on self-care techniques or different ways to be able to live each day in this chaotic environment and actually feel like they're manifesting change instead of being led by a leash each day and they don't know, what to do next. I think we could have some discussions on some tips for people to be able to utilize throughout the day. And I think even maybe a future discussion. Oh, we lost Justin. A future discussion around possibly how we can assist some people that are seeking in ways where they're listening to what we're talking about and resonating in some way. Even if they oppose in some ways, that's great too. But there are many people out there that we're trying to bring into these conversations to have. Oh, there's Justin. Hey, you're back.
Internet drop.
I was just saying that something else we could possibly do for people is to have some Q&A if some people have some questions.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many people out there right now that are interested in some of the topics we're talking about and trying to be able to share them with friends and family and loved ones so that they can have these open-hearted conversations and not feel like it's me against you and right versus wrong. And so possibly we could even give some tips for people of how they can approach that with their friends and family.
Yeah, and just show that example of how to create a safe space where information can be shared freely without this sort of like opinionated, it has to be this way. If you're against me, then you're my enemy kind of thing, because that's what created this division all around. So if we can create those life rafts, if we can create those spaces where people can join together, I'm all for it anytime.
Yes. Well, nobody should take self care tips from me. I mean, look at me. You don't want to look like this. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Questions, that's great. I mean, that right there is a sign of inquiry. So, totally accepting of any question. Good point.
Give yourself some credit there, Madhava. I like your hair. It's got like the mad scientist look to it.
Yeah,
I like it.
it's a good touch.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
Hey,
Thanks for the call.
honored to be part of this conversation, guys.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
both so
I
much.
hope we
Nice
can
to
have
meet
some
you,
more.
Justin. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed hearing you. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate all of this, all the dialogue. It's been wonderful.
Okay, guys. I'm going
Take
to
care.
stop the recording here.